Hello everyone, this is Santoshi Shah from Eidlin, Canada. So today we are going to do interview with Barry Eidlin, a former organizer, current associate professor of psychology at McGill University, and author of The Labor and Class Idea in US and Canada. So we are going to discuss about recent railway strike.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Barry, for joining us today. Can you explain us why the recent railway strike happened and what was the biggest issue? At the same time, the Canadian two largest railway companies stopped and why it's happened.
So the first part of that is why they're stopping at the same time, and that's because the contracts are usually separated by about a year, but then a few years ago in the pandemic, I believe it was CN, I forget, one of the two decided to extend their existing collective bargaining agreement. And that pushed the expiration date to line up with the other rail. So that's why they both ended up in a contract dispute at the same time. Now, what led to the current dispute, and it's important to understand here that we're first talking about a lockout, which is an employer-initiated cessation of operations, and then a strike first at CPKC, and then a threatened strike at CN. Those are two different things, a strike and a lockout. But how we got there is that there were several months of negotiations, and the core issues at stake were related to job safety and scheduling. We need to remember that these are some of the most dangerous jobs in Canada. They are often done in remote parts of the country where if something goes wrong, it can be very difficult to get help. And if something goes wrong on the rails, it can have disastrous effects, not only for the workers themselves, but for the communities these railways pass through. And so given the safety issues involved, it's vitally important that these workers be well rested and that they not be overworked, because that dramatically increases the risk of injury and accidents. And so what the union was fighting for was better language for scheduling and job safety. Meanwhile, the employers were not substantively dealing with those issues, and instead were issuing proposals that would require workers to move across the country for up to 3 months at a time to patch labor shortages in various parts of the network. And so this was sort of the crux of the substance at the bargaining table that was creating friction. And rather than reach agreement on these issues, the employers responded by shutting down their own rail networks. And that's what happened on Friday and what provoked the government intervention. And what the government did essentially was give the employers what they wanted, because for weeks the employers had been demanding that the government step in and implement binding arbitration. And so under the threat of the economic chaos caused by the employer shutting down their own rail network, the government caved to their demand and ordered everyone back to work and referred the case to binding arbitration. Now, the wrinkle to that is that the union had issued a strike notice at CPKC. So when the initial arbitration order was issued, they kept striking at CPKC, and the CN workers issued a 72-hour strike notice. And that's when the CIRB, the Canada Industrial Relations Board, intervened to say the government's order requires everyone to go back to work pending binding arbitration. And so now we're in a situation where both companies' workers at CPKC and at CN are back at work, and the case is under review at the Canada Industrial Relations Board by their arbitration division.
Yeah, that's true. And already I think problem is resolved and workers get back to work.
Well, the
There is
problem
no,
is not resolved. That's the problem. Is
but
that the
they
workers are
are,
back at the workers are
yeah,
back at work, but the problems are not resolved. That's
but there is
precisely the
no strike,
problem.
right?
There's no strike right now,
Yeah.
but the issue at stake by short-circuiting the collective bargaining process by putting an end to the work stoppages. What the government is doing is, first of all, kicking the can down the road and not addressing the substantive issues that are at the heart of the labor dispute, while also sending a message to employers that they don't have to reach agreement at the bargaining table. They can just drag their feet in negotiations, make sure things come to an impasse, and then wait for the government to impose back to work order.
So how this strike is going to impact Canadian day-to-day life?
So rail is in many ways the backbone of the Canadian economy. The estimates from Transport Canada are that there's roughly $1 billion of trade that rides the rails on any given day. There's portions of the freight rail system that are shared by commuter rail. So when the freight rail workers went on strike or were locked out first and then were on strike, that prevented commuter rail from working. So there are tremendous economic impacts. What's important to recognize here is that it's precisely the economic impact that shutting down rail can cause that is the necessary bargaining leverage to persuade the employers to come to the bargaining table and reach a negotiated agreement. If you take away the leverage that compels the employer to come to the table, they will not come to the table and they will not negotiate an agreement. This is sort of the lesson of the past century of Canadian labor relations, is that employers will drag their feet and will not negotiate unless they are compelled to do so under the threat of economic sanctions, which are backed up by a meaningful right to strike. So yes, the shutting down the rail causes huge problems for the economy and for Canadian consumers. And that's the point. It's supposed to do that because it's supposed to create incentive for employers to negotiate with the union. And when you take that incentive away, the entire bargaining structure grinds to a halt.
Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate for today's interview and your valuable time. All the information is useful for the people and for us too. Thanks everybody. That's all for today. And we'll see you on next video. Bye-bye.